On today's Tech Help for Churches, genre and format for your podcast. Hi everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Tech Help for Churches. My name is Paul Allen Clifford, and I'm your host, and I would love for you to join the conversation by heading over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/contact. There you can find all my contact information, like my email address, which is paul@trinitydigitalmedia.com, the phone number 1-877-POD-ECHO, 1-877-763-3246, or my Twitter handle, Paul Allen Cliff, PAULALANCLIF, where you can reach out to me. I've got a very active Twitter account, so that's a great place to interact with me as well. Keep in mind that this is a podcast, so if you miss the live recording every Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. UTC during the summer, you can absolutely subscribe. It's free. So head on over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/subscribe. If you're already a subscriber, I'd love for you to head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/iTunes reviews and give me a review at one of the links listed there. The video is starting to be available, so you can subscribe to either the audio or the video, whichever you would prefer, maybe both. It's up to you. And that would be very helpful to me and helpful to you because you don't have to check every single week. It'll just show up automatically. When I'm done with the editing and uploading and all that fun stuff, it'll show up for you in your feed reader or in iTunes or in whatever podcasting app that you're using. So that is very helpful to you. So let's get started. What I've been doing this month, this is June 2014, I've been going through some chapters in my book, Podcasting Church, and just going through different things to help your church with its podcast. Now, some of you don't have a podcast for your church yet. Some of you do, and it needs help, quite frankly. Let's be honest. I haven't subscribed to everyone's podcast, so I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, but I just know a lot of church podcasts need help. So this is one of the main areas, this first topic, genre. Genre is kind of the skeleton on which any show is built. Now you might be thinking, well, it's a worship service, it's not a show. Just humor me on this. I'm going to be talking in terms of production, not necessarily in terms that are inherently holy, partially because I don't believe there is such a thing as an inherently holy word. Names, maybe, but that's something totally different. So first, most churches will podcast their sermon. Now this makes perfect sense. Every week there is a sermon, so why not throw that into the podcast feed? Just start when the sermon starts, stop when the sermon stops. Maybe you edit in something at the beginning and something at the end just to let people know about it, but that's it. That's something that you can do fairly quickly and easily. Here's the problem. Almost every church that does a podcast does this. So perhaps your pastor is particularly good at preaching. If so, good for you. But I think that there's really a lot of opportunity to differentiate yourself in terms of your podcast by doing something other than the sermon. Now, not instead of the sermon necessarily, although maybe, but in addition to. So here are some ideas that, again, are in my book, Podcasting Church, and you can take them or leave them or adapt them or what have you. So first off, classes. Stop and think about all the classes that your church does. Do you have a parenting class? Do you have a dealing with problematic teenager class? Do you have a what it's like to be single class? Do you have a you're about to get married class? Some of those maybe would uh, it would be helpful if they were podcasted. What happens if you could reach out to people on these particular life issues every week and help them? So I'm thinking of a good example. This isn't a church that does this, but this is a ministry that does this. Uh, it's a marriage podcast called Sexy Marriage Radio with Corey Allen. I almost combined those two. Corey Allen and Shannon Etheridge, formerly Gina Paris. She moved on. Shannon took over. And they talk about issues pertaining to married couples. And it's not targeted necessarily specifically to Christian married couples, although they're both Christians. They're both married in different marriages. And they come at it from that perspective, and they don't make any bones about that. So that would be an example of a class or something weekly that you could do to really enrich the lives of people around you. Next, what I call the missions moment. What if you had a weekly podcast that was all about how your church was serving people, either locally or internationally? You could feature an international missionary, or you could talk about how you'd sent a Sunday school down to help out at the local rescue mission, etc. That would be some pretty cool stuff, and I think that it would really help build buzz about the positive things that your church is doing. Maybe a ministry report. There are several ministries that are doing things that aren't necessarily social justice or helping those in need kind of things, but it would be nice to have even a monthly, hey, this is what the women's ministry is doing this month. This is what the children's ministry is doing. This is what the youth ministry is doing. This is what the singles are doing, the college-age people. These are the different ministries of the church and what they're doing. So you could have a ministry report, and you could even highlight one ministry a week, one or two ministries. Let's say you've got 8 ministries in the church. Just highlight 2 ministries a week and what they've done this past month. That could be pretty cool. What I'm learning. What if you had the pastor or lead volunteer or someone like that talk about their own spiritual life and the books they're reading, the things that they've learned, the classes they're taking, anything that they've done that's helped them grow spiritually. I think that would be a neat peek behind the scenes, especially if it was the pastor or your worship leader or whoever talking about what they're learning and how they're growing. Next, training. This is basically what this is. This is a training podcast, and the idea behind it is that churches can learn more things so that they can be up to speed faster. Well, if you've got a tech ministry or a children's ministry or a music ministry and you have certain procedures in mind, certain things that you do over and over again, why not record those and save them for later? Then when you get new volunteers into the ministry, when you get new staff into the ministry, they have a resource already. So that's kind of a fun idea, I think. Meetings, there are a lot of meetings in churches. What if someone can't make a meeting? Well, for each team that has meetings, you could record each meeting, put them on a private podcast, and then members of that meeting could subscribe to it, and when they're not able to attend, they can just listen to what they missed at their leisure. How's that for a fun idea? Announcements. Every week, you probably have someone that lists everything that's going on for the week. Well, what if instead of just listing what's going on for the week, you made that into a podcast and you just uploaded it and people could just subscribe. So if they came in late or had to leave early for whatever reason and they missed the announcement, or they remember there was something important there, they just can't remember what it was, they could listen to that later on in the week. There's something that I've called segments that would also be a fun genre to have. And that would be if your church makes little bitty segments of things. The one that always pops into my mind is we did like a man versus wild kind of thing, only it was our assistant pastor, and he was doing one in a local park called Justin versus Shiloh, the Shiloh Park. And boy, was it funny, because of course the whole point was that he's acting like he's Bear Grylls or one of these survival experts, but he's not. And he's just having trouble. And so that was really a fun thing to watch. And it would be great to be able to share that with people outside the church. It's just something funny your church does. Just not necessarily in a, so please come, we're so funny, please come kind of way, but more in a, hey, this is something funny we do. And let them have the thought, huh, that's funny, I might ought to check it out. Music, and of course now my dog chooses to bark. So music, now if you, I want you to be cautious here, because if you use music that is used by a national recording artist through a record company, there's a chance you're going to get into some trouble. So I really don't want you to do that. Instead, I want you to, if you have songs that you have recorded locally yourselves or songs that are independent in nature, you could have kind of a countdown of the worship music you use. Or, along the same lines, why not have a segment where your worship pastor talks about the songs picked for any particular week and why those were picked over others, or little stories about them. I have a friend that I just read a blog post that he did. Hi, DJ, if you're listening. And he was talking about a song that means something extra special to him, and that was the song When You Go Down to the River to Pray. That's because one of his sons gave his life to Christ on the day that they played that at church. So that would be a neat little podcast to have the music minister tell little stories from his or her own personal life, or even what led to the song being written. So let me suggest that as a possibility. Best of. Have you ever seen the Saturday Night Live Best of DVD compilations? Think something like that. What if you had the best clips for different, either different teaching pastors, if you've got more than one, or different subjects? So this might be great, actually, because people could listen to just a series of sermons on marriage, a series of sermons on finances, a series of sermons on relationships, a series of sermons on fill in the blank, and they could get the best of it from spanning years. And that would be very, very cool. So those are just some of the ideas that I have. And of course, there are absolutely more that you could look into. But I want you to consider how you could use different genres of podcasts, different show ideas to go beyond the sermon and figure out how your church can have more. We'll be back to talk about format in just a second, right after this. TheChurchTech.com, TheChurchTechCast.com series of shows are generously provided for by viewers like you. Thank you. Head on over to patreon.com/Paul Allen Cliff. That's patreon.com/PaulAllenclif to support the show for as little as $1 a month. Every little bit helps. So head over today and help make this a reality for churches all over the world. So now let's talk about format. Once you have decided on a genre for your podcast, once you have kind of in general the skeleton, I want you to think of how you put it together. Let's talk about my format for this particular show. So you're watching this show, so you might not know that I have a particular format in mind. Each portion of the show is divided into segments. We have 2 main segments, but it starts with the cold open on today's Tech Help for Churches, blah, blah, blah. Cold open. Then I do roll the open, which is that little song. That song thing. And then I come back, I give the contact information, introduce myself, and then we go into the first segment. After the first segment, I roll an ad. In this case, it was the Patreon ad. And then I go to the second segment. After the second segment, I go back to a call for you to subscribe, hit iTunes reviews, contact the show, any of those things, and then we close it up with the end. And that is the format. It's really not hard, but I don't create that from scratch every time. Now, sometimes I monkey around with it. I put the ads at the beginning. I put them at the end. I just think I'm tweaking things, trying to make it the best that it can be. But think about how you do it at church. You don't typically say, okay, this week we haven't started with the message before, so let's start with the message, and then let's go for a big upbeat song, and then let's go for a testimony, and let's do a response. That would be a little jumbled up. Things should flow from one to the other, and they should just work together as a whole. So typically what we see in churches is a lot of times there will be a worship or hymn set of songs. There will be some prayer in there. There will be perhaps a testimony, perhaps a drama, a skit, something like that. And then perhaps traditionally what was called an anthem. In more modern worship services, it might be called a performed song. And then the pastor would step up, give the message, and then there would be some closing worship. Maybe announcements would be in there somewhere, during which time the offering would be taken, that kind of thing. So that is the format of your church service. You might tweak things a little bit, move them around a little bit, but from week to week, you don't necessarily change it completely. It's not the case that you never know where the message is going to be. Typically, it's in one chunk in one place. Now, in my church, sometimes we'll break it up into a couple of different chunks with a song in the middle or something, but we don't do that just to be silly. We do that for a particular reason. So that's what I want to encourage you to do, is have a format for your show. Know whether you're starting with your music, maybe you're starting with a tease, maybe you're starting with a cold open, etc. Maybe there's a tease in there. I did one today. Did you notice that? That was, if you're watching the original show and not just segments, it was at the end of the genre portion of the show. Before I got into this one, the format, I did a little tease talking about the fact that we would be right back to talk about formats. That's because I didn't want anyone thinking that I was done, because I wasn't, not quite. So that is the format. And I think once you establish your format, you can go from there and really create something valuable and fun. So let me encourage you to do that, to create your format, write it down on paper, and try and stick with it. Don't forget to head on over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/subscribe. Head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/iTunes reviews. Leave your questions at trinitydigitalmedia.com/contact or right below the video here. That's fine either way. And I just hope that you'll use this information to go out and change eternity. Until next time, I'm Paul Allen Clifford with trinitydigitalmedia.com.